The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 15. The Scandinavian Waltz. Content warning. Dubious consent. Non-consent elements involving major character. When Pansy began hinting heavily that she'd hoped to go to the Yule Ball with Draco, he resigned himself to taking her. In truth, Pansy could be good company, and was attractive, even funny, when she wasn't cutting down everyone with her acerbic tongue. She sent Draco a swath of dark purple fabric with which to match his ascot, and he sent away for a corsage from Billywigs and Blooms. Draco reluctantly looked forward to a night of stiff, formal dancing and tight dress shoes. The night of the Yule Ball, he stood around the entrance of the castle with several other nervous-looking blokes who all appeared to be waiting for dates. Pansy arrived just as Professor McGonagall was arranging the champions for their formal entrance to open the ball. Draco was amused to see Potter, attired in new dress robes but with the same ridiculous hair as always. He'd still managed to snag a good date. The Patils were two of the hottest girls in their year, as nearly every boy in Slytherin would say. He and Pansy joined the throng standing in line for the formal introduction of the champions, and Draco surreptitiously glanced around for a familiar mane of bushy hair, but to no avail. Surely the weasel wasn't right, and she'd lied about having a date. Then the massive double doors of the great hall swung open, and he was forced to watch as the headmasters, champions with their dates, and tournament judges, plus that annoying Percy Weasley fellow for some reason, made their way into the hall. There, on the arm of the Wizarding World's most well-known athlete, was Hermione, looking 1,000 times more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. It took everything in him not to blurt out, "What the fuck?" audibly. As it was, he was fairly certain he made some kind of noise because Pansy sent so much side-eye his way, he would have feared for her vision if he could have spared a glance for her. Hermione's hair was not bushy tonight. Sleek, lovely curls lay gently over her shoulder, trailing down her arm, small purple flower buds tucked here and there in the curls. Her bright copper eyes seemed suffused with light. Her skin glowed under the warm torch and fairy lights. Her dress was a beautiful blue-purple color that he overheard two girls whispering nearby call periwinkle. She looked, frankly, amazing. If Draco didn't already dream of this witch on a regular basis, this would have made him start. His mouth was simultaneously dry and salivating, and he felt like his eyes might physically fall out of his head at any moment. Pym, in the shower with, Seamus Finnegan. They're shampooing each other's hair. Ugh, stop thinking about showers, you wanker, he thought to himself. Lace wings, daisy roots, doxy venom, eye of newt, murtlap tentacles. After another 15 or so potion ingredients, Draco felt as though his brain had cleared enough that he could start thinking straight again. He was annoyed, too, looking around to see that the great majority of the boys, and even a couple of girls, appeared to be lost in similar thoughts to his own. He gritted his teeth and turned to Pansy, bustling her off to their assigned table. Once the dancing commenced, Draco was relieved to see that the gangly, awkward gait of the Quidditch star meant that he was, to put it frankly, a horrible dancer. Crumbs seemed to drag Hermione around the floor in such a stilted fashion he looked almost like a marionette tangling itself up in her arms. Draco led Pansy through the steps with ease, having had ballroom dance lessons from the age of 7 or so. The first dance ended, and the orchestra struck up the opening notes for the Scandinavian Waltz. Knowing what was coming, Draco casually moved himself and Pansy closer to Hermione and Crumb, positioning them only 3 couples away in line. Pansy seemed momentarily confused, then narrowed her eyes thoughtfully. He started with Pansy as his partner, completing the first minute or so of the dance. Next, in quick succession, he danced shorter measures each with Millie Bulstrode and Susan Bones. Finally, he reached his final partner. They both turned to each other, him with a smirk and her with a gasp. He slipped his arms easily around her back, feeling the heat of her skin through the thin fabric of the dress, and relishing in the soft touch of her fingers in his. Their lower halves barely touching, he began to move them confidently through the steps. Their eyes hardly left each other, and Draco tried to put his feelings into the expression of his eyes. "You look beautiful," he murmured with stiffened lips, lest someone be watching them. She smiled and looked up at him, up and down, pretending to count the steps, then looked back at him. "You clean up nicely as well." They separated once more to their original partners for a brief few measures, then were reunited for the final bars of the waltz. As their hands met this time, Draco was surprised to find something inside her hand, now pressed into his. "Thank you for the dance," he said formally, stepping back to offer her a bow as she curtsied. His hand curled round whatever it was, and as he bowed, he glimpsed a tiny bit of white peeking out from under his thumb. Excusing himself from Pansy to ostensibly go find a drink, he opened the handkerchief to find one of the small purple flowers from her hair. Plucking the flower from its cushion, he tucked it into an inside breast pocket of his robe, and placed the handkerchief next to it. Hours later, he had finally shaken off Pansy outside the Slytherin dungeons. She had placed his hands on her body and rubbed longingly against him. When his response was tepid at best, she pulled his shirt tail from his trousers and vigorously began tugging at his belt. "What are you doing?" he asked, narrowing his eyes at her. "All the girls say you'll like this," Pansy said, in what he thought she assumed was a sexy tone. She undid his fly, reaching her hands inside to grab him roughly. "What the fuck, Parks?" He yanked himself as gently as he could from her almost painful iron grasp. "Just let me make you happy, Draco," she moaned in a whiny voice. "No, I don't," he protested, but she ignored him, pushing herself against him. He fought the urge to push her away, not wanting to be rude or be called prudish. He knew how people talked in the dorms. Apparently his good looks and confident manner meant that most people assumed he'd gotten around with plenty of witches. The Slytherin girls all assumed he'd made his way through half the girls in the other 3 houses, and the other houses thought the same about him and the Slytherin girls. Draco decided to see where this would go. He would be lying to himself if he said it wouldn't feel nice to have someone else touch him for a change. After a minute of rubbing him clumsily, Pansy lowered herself to her knees. He grabbed her by the armpits hurriedly. "What are you doing?" he spat at her. "Relax, Draco. It's not a big deal." "No, I don't," he protested, but she ignored him. Then Pansy's warm, wide mouth had slipped down nearly the entire length of him, and he had to disagree with Pansy. Even in spite of the occasional slip of teeth against him, this was definitely something of a big deal. He only wished it hadn't been here, now. He closed his eyes, and suddenly the image of a different witch, one with a pair of bright copper eyes staring up at him lasciviously. Within seconds he'd finished harshly. "Fuck, Draco!" Pansy gagged and spat onto the ground. "You're supposed to say something. Tap my shoulder. Give me some warning before you do that." "Shit, I'm sorry, Pans. I didn't realize I was there yet. I got carried away." He nearly admitted that it was his first time doing something like that, but he knew she would spread that information quickly, and it embarrassed him. "It's okay," she smiled uncertainly, wiping her lips with the back of her hand. She rose, leaned towards him and closed her eyes expectantly. Apparently she wanted a kiss, so Draco obliged hesitantly with a chaste kiss, surprised at the salty, pungent taste on her lips. She had gone ahead inside, but Draco begged off, claiming he wanted to take a walk. He did a mouth-cleansing charm, and popped a spearmint lozenge into his mouth, wandering the halls of the castle a little aimlessly. How the fuck had that just happened? Why had he agreed to go through with it? He shuddered a bit, feeling a bit ill at ease about the whole experience. Ordinarily, he might walk around outside, but he'd heard that the heads of houses were patrolling for people, sneaking out during and after the ball, so he didn't want to take a chance. Why had he agreed to let Pansy do that? Sure, it had felt good, but he had to be honest with himself. He didn't care that much for Pansy, other than as a friend. Had he even really wanted that? If he'd been asked before she'd unzipped his trousers, he'd probably have said no, he wasn't really interested. Once the moment was upon him, though, it had been kind of great. When it came down to it, though, Draco knew that the main problem hadn't been what had happened, but with whom it had happened. The experience sat heavily in his stomach, like a lead weight. He found himself wandering upstairs near the Transfigurations classroom. He knew the entrance to Gryffindor Tower was somewhere close, and he hoped to catch Hermione before she went inside for the evening. From around the corner, a fervour of noise struck up, surprising him. After a moment of listening, he'd surmised that it was Hermione and Weasley, apparently having a battle royale in their common room. A flash of periwinkle rushed by him, and he followed as quietly as he could. Hermione ran into the empty classroom a few doors away, and Draco entered as well, closing the door swiftly, locking it and muttering "Muffliato" to silence the room. She sat at a desk near the front of the room, her face in her hands. "How did you know to find me, Draco?" "How did you know it was me?" "No one else in our year knows a silencing charm." "No one else in the school would choose to go to a classroom alone on a Saturday night after a school dance." She laughed humorously. "Well, no one else was accused of fraternizing with the enemy like a traitor tonight, were they?" Draco's fist balled in his pockets. That insufferable bastard. What right did the weasel have to offer any opinions on the matter? Imagine what he'd said if he'd gone to the dance with me. "The same thing, only angrier," she replied quickly. He laughed, then sobered. "I wanted to ask you, you know, but I knew that it would be difficult for both of us." "I knew." She looked up at him, copper eyes shining in the moonlight from the small window. "Can I have the last dance?" He held out his hand to her, bowing low and waiting for her answer. Her breath caught, and she hesitated for only a moment before reaching for his hand and standing. She didn't seem perturbed that there was no music, only stood close and reached her arm around his shoulders, allowing him to take her other hand. They swayed like this in silence for a few moments, until Draco dropped her hand and put both arms around her waist. She twined her free hand into the hair at the nape of his neck. "Did I ever tell you how much I like your hair like this, instead of the way you used to wear it?" Draco suppressed another laugh. "You mean you didn't like my mobster look? I thought it was dashing. I'll have you know that the man behind the counter at Borgin & Burke's wears it that way, and he looks quite handsome for 356 years old." They laughed quietly. "You still look very fit, but this looks better." "You think I'm fit?" "False modesty doesn't suit you, Draco." "Well, then, How about honesty? Can I say, I thought you were fit as well? You're taking the piss now. He leaned in closer to her, letting his lips touch her hair where it met her forehead. I would never. You're git, she answered, but Draco could hear the smile in her voice. Almost imperceptibly, she leaned a bit more towards him, until her ear rested on his chest. I am a git, he agreed. A git who lets one girl snog him earlier, then dances with another girl because he likes her better. Draco exhaled deeply and pushed the thoughts of what happened with Pansy away. He reached up to touch her hair. It was soft, even with the crackle of anger that suffused it during her argument with Weasley. He closed his eyes and stilled, no longer even pretending to dance. She pulled away slightly. What are we doing, Draco? I don't know, but I would like for it to continue. He leaned his face towards hers, silver eyes searching in the moonlight for something, anything, that would tell him she felt the same. For a brief moment he worried that everything he was able to give wasn't enough. The apologies, the letters, perhaps they meant nothing to her. Then he felt her sway as she rose up on her toes, bringing her lips closer and brushing them tentatively across his. In an instant he surged towards her, trying to tell her without words how much she meant to him. She opened her mouth. Was it to protest or to deepen the kiss? Draco decided that it was the latter, and he tentatively pressed his tongue into her mouth. She gave a tiny squeak of surprise, then everything, her mouth, shoulders, arms and hands, all seemed to relax at once, as she simultaneously pulled him closer. His hands around her waist spread open so that he could feel more of her, rubbing soft circles on her back. He put every ounce of his emotions in his kiss. He wanted her to have no doubt about the intensity of his feelings for her. She pulled away from him, her beautiful copper eyes widening. He met her gaze only for a moment before kissing her neck, finding the soft skin where her neck met her shoulder and sucking a small love bite there. I don't mean to scare you off, he said quietly into her neck, but I care about you very much. It's all right. Seemingly reluctant, Hermione stepped back but smiled at him longingly. But I really should go. It's getting late, and my dorm mates will want to talk all about tonight. Well, be sure to tell them that Draco Lucius Malfoy is a fantastic kisser. Really top-notch. The best kisser you've ever had. Feel free to embellish if you wish. Hermione scoffed, then giggled. You know, girls love hot gossip, she ventured teasingly. She arched a brow at him, eliciting a chuckle from him. He knew that she would never say his name in a discussion like that. Good night, Hermione. He placed his hands lightly on her shoulders and drew her lips to his once more, placing a chaste kiss there. It was her turn to dart her tongue against his, catching him by surprise as it moved against him. Just a little bit of embellishment, you know, she said with a smile. In an instant she was gone, closing the classroom door quietly behind her, looking up from between the door and the jamb just as it was closed to catch his eye one last time and smile. He smiled back dopily, like the complete tosser that he was, then sat hard on the table behind him. Not just a kiss, but a kiss. His first real kiss, in fact, with the girl that he'd actually chosen. He didn't really count the perfunctory pecks that he'd shared with Pansy tonight, or the awkward kisses with a couple of young witches in his youth. He sat like that for some time, replaying the events of the last several minutes in his head. His father had a pensieve, Draco briefly wondered if he could figure out how to use it the next time he was home. He might pay a pretty knut to see Hermione dancing in that periwinkle dress again. He touched his dress robe pocket briefly, feeling the soft petals of the flower inside, resting next to the handkerchief. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.